Hello and welcome to our Future Work World podcast. My name is Barry Winkless, Chief Strategy Officer at Cpl Group and Head of the Future of Work Institute.
And I'm Elysia Hegarty, Associate Director at the Future Work Institute.
Now, throughout the show, we will discuss a range of topics relating to the present and the future of this thing called work.
And interview experts in their field to inspire you to make changes to improve work and life.
Now, Elysia, we've got an interesting trend today that we're going to speak a little bit about, and it's really about flattening structures and empowering teams.
Yes, exactly. So I'm reading a lot about, traditional hierarchies are evolving as organizations are embracing flatter structures to enhance agility and collaboration. For example, Spotify, their model organizes employees into squads, tribes, chapters, and guilds to facilitate the cross-pollination of knowledge. And we know that this can encourage, cross-functional teams, sharing expertise, and it's deviating a lot from this kind of conventional top-down structures. So just to quickly explain what this means, chapters essentially are organized by skill set. Squads then collect clusters of people from different chapters and have them all work toward delivering a product or service. A guild then are kind of looser collectives of people who are organized around maybe a shared interest or goal. Essentially, it's like a community of interest. They would probably remain in their chapter or their squad, but they can flex in and out, and anyone can really join a guild. They're completely voluntary. And then the tribe, it's a whole cluster of chapters and squads, and with guilds running through them. So it's a big collective group of all organized around achieving a big central mission for the organization. Now, a lot of them vary in structure, and I know you have a few examples as well. But in general, they rely on consistent communication, decentralized decision making, and the self-motivation of employees. So it can be hard to get right for a lot of organizations. The benefits we've seen is, increased innovation, creativity, speed, resilience, and improved employee morale. But like I said, they are tricky. There's not a lot of organizations that are really doing it or doing it well. Have you seen any, Barry, that you've seen doing well?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's one of the areas we looked at as part of our Future Work World model. And what we're definitely seeing is that move more towards how do we empower our people. And, even if you look at let's take the IT departments within organizations that we work with, a lot of them are now using agile or more ownership-driven approaches, so people get a greater sense of ownership ultimately over the projects. There's some really interesting examples that we've come across over the years. One is obviously Supercell. And I really like the CEO. He calls himself the world's least powerful CEO, which I think is a lovely phrase, because ultimately it's about delegating authority right down to the people that are closest to the work. And a few of the things I found out about Supercell is there's really three focuses, in terms of our principles, I suppose we call them. One is, get the right people first and foremost. And obviously within our own world around talent, attraction and retention, we know that's so important. The second one I really loved was focusing on progress over power. So as opposed to worrying about what roles or what levels people are at, focus on progress. And the third one's really interesting one. I think this is a really important one when it comes to these flatter structures. It's transparency. And I think when any of the companies we're looking at that are doing, or trying to adopt a much flatter structure in terms of how to do things, what we're really also finding is a greater need for transparency in decision making, even right down to things like remuneration, how bonuses are given, how decisions are being made. So I think Supercell is a really interesting one in that their own model is very much based around the cell structure. Excuse me, hence the name. There are other companies like Zapier, are a fully remote team, and they're divided into 8-people teams that deliver a lot of work. And also, if you think about within our own organization, within our own teams, within the Future Work Institute, as a leader of that team, my focus is very much around how do we actually give, number one, people the trust, that they feel they can fail. So I think that's really important. But then also giving them what I call hero projects, and you've been involved in a few of those, Elysia, as the producer of this show, which really are projects that, are at the intersection of, for me, pushing people, to a new level, but also something that they really love to do. And I always think if you can get that magic right, the motivation then comes. So, if you think about the Future Work Institute, we're actually living some of these principles and some of this much flatter structure approach every day. And we've learned a lot, if you think about it, Elysia, from that perspective. And sometimes it can feel, complex and challenging, and other times it feels so empowering. But I think ultimately, this move towards this greater empowerment and flatter structures is something that's going to be growing, and it's going to be around a lot longer than we think. And I know there's examples where things have changed or failed in other organizations, but by and large, the companies we're working with are also trying to drive that greater ownership over the work. And I think that's the important point. It's not about the flatter structure, because there's loads of different ways you can do it. It's about how do we put the work into the hands of people that they can feel a greater sense of ownership and really a greater sense of delivery.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a fear, and you touched on it as well, is that there needs to be structure to it. It needs to be underpinned by the overall organisational strategy. It's not a case of people going off, setting up their own little guild, doing what they want, and we're going to work on this project. It needs to all kind of be tied in and related to the overall organisation. Yeah,
and it's actually it's a good point you make, actually, because anything that we're looking at, autonomy is only as important as alignment. So where you've really strong alignment, broad alignment on the direction you're trying to go, autonomy will really work. Where you don't have really good alignment, it can get really messy really quickly. I think just to bring it as well just into the some of the catchphrases space as well, if you think about this drive now around things like manufacturing and industry 5.0, where there's a real focus on connected technologies and more advanced technologies, I think that's actually driving a greater focus now on creating those kind of self-managing teams, flatter structures, because actually what all of this disruption is doing is putting, weirdly enough, more power into the hands of these teams. And I think for me, for manufacturing and industry 5.0 to work, to make this dream come alive, it also needs empowered, fully empowered teams and much flatter structure. So I think it's an interesting one. And sometimes the technology will drive the change, and sometimes organizations are very forward thinking, will say, hold on a second, we want to give more power into the hands of our people. We know it's going to be difficult, but we're going to stick with that task. And, in some instances, bureaucracy makes sense, a hierarchy makes sense, right? But in many instances, and more, empowerment and flatter structures seems to be the way to go, particularly in modern organizations. So I think it's a really interesting trend. It's here to stay. And I think we're going to see more and more different versions of, some of the examples that we spoke about, including ourselves, as we continue to push at the edges of the future work as well.
Yeah, and I think just one final point that I think is also really important to consider is, as this evolves, leadership will evolve. Leadership behaviours are going to need to evolve. So we're going to see kind of hand in hand how that, some people we fall into the trap of looking to this person to tell me what to do. It will probably change and will need to change if we're implementing flatter structures.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're definitely putting more decision-making power, closer to the people on the team. And I think it's interesting. When I think about my own role, I always think about myself more as not even a conductor, because that still assumes a leadership kind of a role, but it's more an orchestrator. Putting people on interesting projects, getting people working together, putting them in interesting situations, et cetera, but also with the context that they know that I have their back ultimately. So I think you're absolutely right. I think, even the word leadership in itself, and, words are powerful. So maybe leadership as a word needs to evolve into something different. Not for today, but maybe that's something we need to think about.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Hi everyone, today we're joined by Mick Bohan. Mick is the current Dublin Ladies football manager. He's worked as a coach with multiple Dublin teams, including developmental squads, minors, under-21s, men's, ladies, and also with the Clare footballers. Between underage, colleges, men's and ladies football, he's played a part in winning over 15 national titles. One of the leading coaches in the country, he has transformed Dublin Ladies GAA into a powerful force, winning 4 All-Irelands in a row and the most recent All-Ireland. Welcome, Mick. Great to see you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Yeah, fabulous to have you. I'm going to start with the first question, which I'd love to know. What does leadership mean to you?
So, leadership, and you have to think about these things, because I don't think anyone writes the book on them, or at least they don't write the book on them at the start. They may do at the end. And it's a series of different qualities. And I had to think about that in my own head and think, what are the things that I actually bring to the table? And as part of that, you know, you're trying to provide the infrastructure for the players for them to be successful. You're trying to give them the tools to be successful. And I think this part is really important that you put them at the center of the story, not you. And the combination of those, and I'm not sure at the start of all of that I would have known that, but I reflect over my time in management and think, well, what are the things that worked? Because we made plenty of mistakes. And I've had people, and particularly in the last number of years, and we use the term disruptive thinkers. And I would have a disruptive thinker watching me to tell me the things that I am doing good or not so good. And as part of that, then, it keeps your leadership on track. And I think that's really important. And I certainly wouldn't have known that at the start. I would have felt whatever I was doing was right. And that little bit of arrogance that comes with youth. But as we all know, the pebbles in the road teach you a lot of things. And one of them is if you're not able to self-reflect and be a little bit constructive thinker or disruptive thinker about yourself and your own behaviours, well, then you're never going to go very far.
Yeah, and that disruptive thinker is kind of like on your shoulder.
Yeah, and you need someone who's strong, because I would have found this myself over the years. I mightn't necessarily take the criticism on board immediately, but I would go away with it, and it would be in my head. But it takes a strong person to say that to a strong person. So that has been really helpful for me in my leadership role.
I think that's really interesting, because I think for a lot of leaders as well, that's having that open mind is really, really important, to being able to take that criticism or advice, counsel, support, whatever anyone wants to call it. I think it's a really vital for every leader. We don't have all the answers, you know. So
and I certainly know, starting out, like, I mean, I'm involved in teams. I think the first time I got involved with a team was when I was 19, and I'd often say this to people in the game. I was handed a bag of ball and a set of cones, and about 10 years later, somebody asked me how I was getting on. See, at 19, you haven't a clue. You think you do, but you haven't a clue, right? I still think back to when I was 31 or 32, I didn't have a clue. So now, you know, 20 or 25 years on from that, and having had huge experience working with really good people, and that's part of the story, that you have to, like, you have to work with other people, and you have to see the things that work and the things that don't work, and there's things that some leaders do that you like, and there's other things you don't like. And then I think this is a really important part of it, like trying to be authentic, yourself. Like, if you're trying to, I mean, you know, it's like even trying to tell someone else's story. If it's not your story, it's very difficult for you to tell it. But so I think that all those things, but I also think there's an aging in that a little bit like in life, that when you're comfortable in your own skin, that you actually start to do those things naturally. And there's certainly a part of that, like, you know, that players want to see. They want to see you. You know, they don't want... Now, I was a teacher for 33 years, and there's a certain bit of showmanship. When you're in front of a class, there's a bit of acting. When you're in front of a team, there's a bit of acting. But you still have to show them what's inside in your soul.
I think that's really interesting. The comment you made earlier on about reflection really resonates with me, because I'm often the same. You're taking, as a leader, you're taking a lot of input in, you know, and you just need that breakaway time to reflect and go, oh, actually, what she said was bang on, you know, and now I have to absorb it and use it, you know. You know, I think that's a really important point. I find myself reflecting more now and recognizing I actually don't have all the answers, you know, no matter how good you think you are. You know? And
that bit, like, I had a girl who played football for Dublin, a girl called Elaine Kelly, and she's a clinical psychologist. But I brought her into the group a number of years back, and she would have dealt with a lot of one-on-ones with players, and she was excellent. But she was very good with me in that she came to me on some of the home truths, And she gave me this line once, you know, I had asked her after a couple of months how things were going. She said, things are going well. She said, you spend about 10 hours a week breaking them, and I spend about 30 hours a week fixing them. And I remember laughing initially at the thing, but then little by little she was coming back to me, whether it was you were too hard on somebody or you said something that was insensitive, or I'm like, initially I'd go, yeah, that's fine. And she would feel that I dismissed what she said, but I'd come back to her 2 or 3 days later. I'd say, okay, I thought about that, and I actually didn't mean it in that way, but look, we'll have that chat. But so there is a part of your makeup that puts up with a kind of a defence wall. None of us like being criticised too much. Yeah. But what she did teach me was, if I wasn't going to have a hard look at myself, it was very difficult for me to ask a player to have a hard look at themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
There you go.
That's really true. And that's part of the vulnerability piece as well that you mentioned, earlier. And there's a lot of talk around, the benefits of being vulnerable.
Yeah.
I think, Mick, just in terms of, we're talking obviously about teams here. And I suppose you've been involved in many teams. You've learned a lot about how do we make a successful team. So what are the traits of a successful team? What makes a team successful versus those that aren't?
So again, and only with experience, and culture is a term we throw out easily now. It's kind of like everybody talks about culture. And long before we ever referred to culture, we would have all been brought up by families, and different families had different sets of rules. That was culture. They were creating the culture in the family. Like, I look back to my own father, Lord rest him, and no matter what row you had, it did not take place in public.
Yeah.
And that he would lose the plot with you in the house if you had done something in public and let the family down. But that's a little bit a part of the culture of a team, that when you go out there into the public arena, no matter what is going on in-house, you do not spill that out. We'll sort out our problems in our own place, but not for everyone else to see. So that's creating a healthy culture. And equally, we talk to our team about how they represent in their social time, that they're not off duty.
Yeah.
They're still representing our city and our town. And we're lucky in that point of view that like all our players are from the same place. They're representing the same city. And very interestingly, a couple of years ago, and we put a big emphasis on this, on what's their why? Why are they here? What are they doing all this for? Just to win a cup and win a trophy? That has to be more than that. Yeah. And realistically, they came back to us, and it was an amazing story that the biggest reason for them being involved in playing intercounty football, and it is a sacrifice. Lots of people tell you about the privilege, and it is a privilege too, but it's a sacrifice that goes with that privilege. But the reason they did it was for their families. That was the number one reason, to make their families proud. And that's such a powerful thing, because ultimately the people they care most for in the world are their families. So if that's the reason they're doing this, well, you've already got a powerful force in behind them.
Yeah, no.
I think it's interesting. Just on your topic there, I use the phrase "in the bubble," and it's something I probably learned from my father as well, which is, have the conversations in the bubble, which is my own team.
Very good.
And we can talk all we like within the bubble, but once you go outside the bubble, we've a united voice. So I think that's fascinating, and we're definitely joined at the hip of that one, because I think I had the same experience with my own father, which is, look, have those. He used to call it off stage, because he was involved in the theatre. And look, let's have the conversation off stage, But you'd have the conversation. The conversation was coming,
And that's a lovely term. I loved, that's a natural terminology. I like those things. What I didn't get from my dad was this: in order to be off stage or out of the bubble and express yourself, you have to be confident to do that. And you have to create the scene for it. Yeah. Because it's all fine, we'll solve our own problems when we're out of the public eye, but if you don't have a voice, you can't solve the problem. So there's something I probably found out about myself, that I'm a strong character, and people as head of something, people want you to be a strong character. But if you're too strong and you don't, like I would have been told before from some of the members of my leadership group that people were afraid to speak up. I'm thinking, why?
Yeah.
In my own head, I was there, if you have something to say it. I'm well able to take it. But sometimes if you are too strong or you don't create the atmosphere correctly for them to have a voice, well, then they won't.
Yeah.
And that's not healthy.
Yeah.
So like that, I mean, I think back to the family situation, you think that's all fine. Like when we go in the door and you go in the door and you open your mouth and you're shut down. So that's not having a voice either. So like that, saying that, you know, we'll keep our problems out of the public eye or creating that healthy culture that we're going to protect the group is fine once the voice is given to them in the right, you know, in that right atmosphere.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, no, and that's really important. And look, that comes down to kind of the next question, which we were looking at building trust and communication, you know, amongst the team. And what are some of those strategies that you use to kind of continue to enforce and encourage people to communicate with one another and trust one another within the team?
So we've seen breakdowns on this. So we've altered this over the years. But a leadership group, most people would have leadership groups, whether it's in a team or in a workplace. But it's funny, within the leadership group, you need people to direct, and just forming a leadership group and not really giving a state of affairs or some kind of direction, that doesn't work, because it's just then ticking a box for the sake of it. And like this, when you set up those things, you need to know what you want to get out of them. So in order to give, the most important people in your group are the people under you. Like we're not going to be successful if the players aren't in a good place. In a workplace, if your staff aren't in a good place, then you're not going to be as successful as you possibly could be. So creating that environment for them is so important. The second thing, or at the top of that pile, is having the correct players, having the correct staff. Like if we pick the wrong players, if we don't have the best players representing us and having them in the right frame of mind, no matter what we do as a management team, we won't be successful. So then, and I would have said this over the years, in particularly in female sports, because it tends to be looked after more in male sports. If you don't invest in them, and that's not always financially. Sometimes it's time, sometimes it's creating the infrastructure around them, but you must invest in them. Like I always remember Sinead Ahern making the point to me about like Dermot Connolly, one of the greats who played for Dublin football, and she said to me, so as a footballer, female footballer, she's compared to a male footballer. The game is compared. But she didn't get the same investment. She didn't get the start. She didn't get the coaching. She didn't get the S&C. She said, if people want us to play at that level, they have to invest in us, right? But the same thing goes in a workplace. If you want your staff to do X, Y, and Z, you have to skill them, upskill them to do those things. And for example, if they're struggling, or as we all do, hit barriers in life, and you don't provide the buffer for them at that period of time, like us. I mean, I think back to COVID with my team, and that girl I mentioned to you, our psychologist, was in touch with 25 players out of a group of 32 who were struggling during COVID. And I always think back at this, if people as successful as them, as motivated as them, were struggling during that period of their lives, what was society like in general?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I suppose for me, look, you've some exceptional players on this team, and you've worked with some exceptional players, and I always like to bring my daughter into these conversations because, you know, for me, there are new role models for kids like my daughter. I suppose I'd like to explore that a little bit, you know, in terms of, you know, the role that now some of these exceptional players are having beyond the game, right? You know, you've seen the impact. So talk to us a little bit about that. I know you kind of shared a story with me written by one of the exceptional players there, and I'm just interested in, you know, their impact beyond the game now, you know?
So I'd say much more than the lads team. Our group would realise how important a role they have in trying to be role models, because it's a fledgling situation. It's the women's games in general. I look back, I mean, and you know, I've spent my years, or my career as a PE teacher. When my sport happens to be Gaelic games, and I would genuinely say this, I don't care what sports kids play once they're active and once they're healthy. So, like, I mean, have I got an issue if a child decides to play soccer or rugby? No, I don't. So, and sometimes we're a little bit protective about our games and we don't see the other things, right? But I'm big enough at this stage. So I look back over, you know, the World Cup in women's soccer, which just took place. What a spectacle.
Yeah,
I used to have the games on the fridge.
Yeah.
Going home at the evening, I have 2 little ones in the house who are mad into their sport. But I used to go home genuinely to watch the game. I didn't see it as the English team were playing the Spanish team and they were girls. It was a game of football. And I've gone after that mantra with our group from the start. Like, I'm trying to think of the 2019 final broke the record in women's sport in Ireland. 56,000 people came. And we had a mantra: if you want them to come and watch you play, perform. And rather than, we would have had things like on our banners in the dressing room, like who we are is how we play and all this kind of stuff to try and raise the bar. But they became hugely aware of the representation that they had, that they knew that it was having a massive influence on young kids. And I think back to things over the years. You're talking about your little one. I have 2 little ones, and the youngest is 10. And I sometimes go to train, I have to look in the back of the Jeep, because she would have snuck in just to come and see them. And that's the influence that, and she's grown up with it. Like, since she was 3, I've been involved. So like, when you say that about you, I completely get that, because I have it at home, and they can have it as often as they want or get access. But that's how excited. Like, we had a gym session last night, and you know, Freya, a 9 o'clock session, and she should be in bed, and I'm pleading with her mother to get her out just for half an hour, just to say hello, whatever else, and I have to just show my face or whatever. But so they became hugely aware of the knock-on effect that they were having. So as a result of that, representation became a bigger thing than just playing the game. Yeah. But we've had situations over the years. We had a child from Meath, God bless her, who had an epileptic fit at the top of a stairs in her grandmother's house and fell down the stairs, and she severed her spinal cord. And so basically, very quickly, she would have felt or been told that she wasn't going to get she wouldn't have been told, but her parents would have been told that it was highly unlikely she'd get the power in her legs again. And her parents reached out to us, because the kid, even though she was from Meath, was a mad Dubs fan. And we had a couple at that time. Noelle Healy was a doctor, and we had another girl, Lucy Collins, who was a physical therapist in the hospitals. And they reached out to them, and we stayed in touch with the kid. And she came to training, and would you believe that child, 9 months after that accident, led us out to an All-Ireland final, where she walked, not as she had done before, but incredible from where she had got.
Wow.
She came into our gym and did gym sessions with the girls, and it was her father, fair play to him, who realised the power that the group had. And he was saying to us that in order for her to be motivated to do things she needs to do to give her any chance, was there any way? And in fairness to our crew, they were all over it, right? But so I think of those scenarios, like, or even, you know, after the All-Irelands, when you're lucky enough to go into the children's hospital. And even this year, I didn't know it, was one particular kid that we had met, and she was terminally ill, and we hadn't been told beforehand. And I remember walking out afterwards thinking, oh my God, like, the kid, the only thing she wanted to do was the jersey signed or the card signed, and mad into her football. And you think, jeepers, the child. But the point being that this, for her parents, this was so important that the girls got to spend those couple of minutes. And you think of the power of sport. Yeah. So yes, they have a massive knock-on effect, and yes, they have taken ownership of how much influence they can have on young girls going through the system.
Because I always remember one thing I always remember, and I'll always be forever grateful, for Dublin it is GAA for this one was my daughter's eyes. We were invited to a training session. You probably don't remember this, Mick, but probably 7 years ago now. So she was just turning 6 and she was, getting into GAA, and she just stood at the sideline at the start to see the girls training, and her eyes were a little. And then when she was invited into the huddle, that just for her was the moment that she became obsessed with being the best. And it's because it's not just for her; it was about the sport. And then, what did they do that? How did they get so good? How did they do this? And blah blah blah. And that has literally become that moment to now. And that's why I say those little moments where you kind of go, okay, wow, that actually what it means to her. Whereas you can talk about it, but then you see the face and you go, wow, okay, that's the impact. That's all. I'll always remember that.
Yeah.
That was one of my memories of her. Is connected with that.
And ultimately, Barry, as a result of that, as we use the term, you've skin in the game, because of how much obviously you're invested in your child, you will never forget that. No. So that's what it is across the board. I look at families now, and you'd meet people across the city or even in town, and you obviously wouldn't know, and someone come up to you and say, "You've no idea what you've done for my child,"
Wow.
and you're there, and what they're trying to tell you in 60 seconds is that, well, I have a kid playing football because of your group, or I have a kid who's mad into sport, or I have a kid who now has heroes that they didn't, or heroines they didn't have before, and you feel really empowered when you hear that, because that's the stuff that gives you energy to go again, and you need energy.
That's true.
Yeah. And I think also you talk about, they've their ownership, and their leadership, and that they understand the impact that they're having and the influence that they're having, and even from just to even bring that back to the workplace as well. As leaders, we have an obligation to influence the next generation of leaders, as well. So it's interesting the parallels between the two. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's there is no coincidence. And I look at, say, some of the great leaders we've been lucky to have, like Sinead Ahern, like Carla Rowe, like Noelle Healy. It's no coincidence that they're successful in their careers. You don't just be a good leader on a pitch and not off it. As a result of that, you're able to contribute hugely to society. But the power of using sport in order to help basic needs in life that everybody should have. And I look at that from the leaders that we've had, and the things that we use a mantra: our town, our people, our values. And on every crest we have our town, our people, our values. And we keep harping on about how lucky we are to represent. But as a result of that comes a responsibility in how we represent. Yeah. And that would be not, obviously the way you carry yourself, but equally the way you play. Yeah. And the game has changed over the last number of years. I mean, we weren't successful for a couple of years, and the game, it became quite defensive. And we went back to our group and had this conversation as regards, is this the way you want to play? And they made the decision that, no, we'll stay true to our values. We want to play the game a certain way. We want to. We don't want just to win a game. We want to put on a show. We want to make sure people see us and the skill sets that we provide at a really high level. And I thought that was a fantastic statement from the group, to stay true to themselves, not just to try and win a trophy or a cup, because you could go after it a different way, and they didn't. They chose a more difficult path.
Fascinating. Like, I think for me, there's no way, it's a better way to finish off the interview. It's been fantastic. You remind me of something there when you were talking, just to maybe finish off, was I was told by a long time ago, a mentor of mine about leadership. And I said, look, Barry, one thing you need to know about leadership, it's not a right, it's a responsibility. And I think you've definitely shown that through your own values, Mick, through the interview today, and obviously the work that you continue to do with a fantastic team. So I just want to say on behalf of myself, Elysia, Future Work World and CPL, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today. Very inspiring and very appreciated.
Can I say thank you, and thank you for CPL support, because without that, our team wouldn't get the opportunity to do the things they do.
Thanks, Mick.
Thank you.
So I'll tell you, Elysia, I know we're coming to the part where I talk a little bit about an artifact of the future. And I've an interesting one for you today, just for everybody to reflect on out there. This was a new certification launched in 2029, and it's called the R certification. And the R certification is only given to organizations that have full regenerative practices within their organization. What that ultimately means is organizations that deliver products and service that have a net benefit onto our planet and their community. So love you to all out there to have a little bit of reflection on the new object. So the R certification, regenerative practices, and think about the environment, sustainability, and where our organizations today and what they need to do to get to a much more regenerative place. So there's our next object of the future, 2029, the R certification. So that's it, guys. We've come to the end in our latest episode of Future Work World. I'd like to thank, obviously, Elysia and for helping me with this show, as always. I'd also like to thank Mick for coming in and speaking to us today. And I'd also like to thank all of you to continue to listen to our ramblings around the future of work. And what I would like you all to do is to come and join the conversation over at futurework.world, where you can download our white papers, join our events, and discuss future of work topics with other leaders from around the world. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.